I'd like to call on Mayor Glenn Neal to say some words. Glenn, of course, is the major sponsor of this, and as Rodney Robb said, if one thing's done, give Glenn a call.
No doubt about me, mate Rodney, is there? You're a loss for words. I heard you say this morning, mate, that you're putting Dicko on a 10-minute limit. Well, I can assure you don't have to wait that long for me. But just before I start, just to follow on what Michael said about Matthew Dickerson, most people probably are aware that this is the man that started the Tour de Europe, that is the major contributor to funds from Macquarie Homestay, which I'm quite sure there's a lot of people here today that would have used that facility. And just recently they had another tour, and I think I read this morning somewhere the figure was close on 240,000. Matthew, is that right?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, a brilliant effort, and I know he had a lot of people behind him, but this is the man here that is really the major pusher in that, so well done on that, mate.
Thanks.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 131st Annual Show for 2024.
Well, about 20 years ago, I first met Matthew Dickerson. He was putting aerials up on roofs around Dubbo. I was shearing then. Well, I'm still shearing, but he's moved on. He's gone to much bigger things. I'd like to call on Matthew Dickerson to come up. Give him a big warm Nyngan welcome. He is the guru of technology, without a doubt. He does a show on Outback Radio, the greatest radio station west of the mountains and the other side, every week. But what he doesn't know about technology hasn't been invented yet. Matthew.
Thank you, Tim. And I was asked to come along and talk about technology today, and then the first thing I see is Glenn coming up in this beautiful old fire engine here. So hopefully we're going to talk about things a little bit more modern than the fire engine Glenn walked up on or drove up on. What I want to talk about today is the wonderful thing with technology that seems to be lots of things happen with technology that then build to something that you may not have been thinking about. And I was reminded of Isaac Newton's words back in 1676 when he said, "If I can see further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants." And the idea there, of course, is that you're accumulating more knowledge and building on knowledge all the time to then develop things further. So I'm going to give you a little pop quiz for you to think about while I talk. There is a bit of technology that we see commonly in society day to day now that relies on 6 different organisations over the last 40 or 50 years. And I'm going to give you the names of those. And when I talk about those, I want you to think about what the technology is that I might be talking about. Now, if you think about it, don't yell it out, don't put your hand up, just think about it to yourself. The 6 organisations, one's NASA, one's Sony Corporation, one's General Electric, Korea Airlines, the CSIRO, and Motorola. So think about those 6 different organisations. I'll talk about them in a bit more detail, and think about what they might have in common for a piece of technology that's in common usage today in society. So I'll talk about those 6. NASA, 1969, they put man on the moon. A crucial bit of technology in that spacecraft was a device called an IMU, an inertial measurement unit. It had gyroscopes, accelerometers and magnetometers in there. That was essential for that spacecraft to know which direction it was headed, how fast it accelerated and where it was going. So that's one. Number 2, Sony Corporation, 1979, they came out with the Walkman. The first time you would see people going around with headphones on. Cliff Richard's Wired for Sound, inspired by the Walkman, that terrible film clip with people on roller skates riding around with headphones on. They found that the motor in the Walkman itself was not good enough. So in 1982 they were granted a patent for a small brushless DC motor. Low energy usage and more control. Keep that in the back of your mind. Number 3, 1982 again, the compact disc was released. It used a new plastic called polycarbonate, and that was held, a patent was held for polycarbonate by General Electric. They were using it for industrial purposes. That's the first time to be used in major consumer items. So the compact disc made of polycarbonate, mouldable, strong, lightweight plastic. The next year, 1983, we had a tragedy across the world. Korea Airlines Flight 007 veered off course. And when it did that, it strayed across Soviet territory, and unfortunately, the Soviets shot that plane down. 15 days later, Ronald Reagan, the president at the time of the US, made an announcement. He said, we've been developing in the US military a bit of technology that we were going to keep for the military. But after KAL 007 has been shot down for a simple navigational error, we're going to release that technology to the world. It's called Global Positioning System, or as we call it today, GPS. So it was from that accident that happened that GPS was given to all of us. 1995, that was finally released. The 24 satellites were up in the air, and that was finally released for all of us to use. In 1992, the CSIRO had a patent for a device called Modern Method of Telecommunication, or Modern Method of Communication. And that was used by 1999 for a standard that we now know as Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi still relies today on that patent from 1992 from the CSIRO. And the last item is in 1996. Motorola released their latest GSM digital mobile phone. They wanted to be lightweight, long battery life, and they wanted to be flexible in its shape, so it was a clamshell. Very popular when it came out. That used lithium polymer batteries, the first usage in a consumer item of lithium polymer batteries. Those 6 different items that were all designed for something completely different all led to one item that we use today. And it wouldn't be possible to have this item without those 6 different items. And that, of course, I'm sure many people in the audience have worked it out, that of course is a quadcopter, or what we would call a modern drone. It's fair to say that you go back 40 years in history, the technology simply was not available to have the modern drone that we've got. Go back 15 years or so, drones started to come out. They were a fun consumer item. You'd buy one so you could look over the neighbour's fence and see what the neighbours are up to. But then finally, in commercial terms, they started to realise they had some practical purposes. And you just had recently, only a few weeks ago, a company called Zipline announced that they delivered its 1 millionth package autonomously by drone. Now they mainly work throughout Africa and some parts of the US, delivering blood, pharmaceuticals, essential medical supplies essentially. In Australia, there's a company called Wing, which is based out, it's a Google subsidiary, but it's in Australia. They were doing trials where they also delivered 100,000 items of absolutely essential pharmaceuticals, or some people know it as coffee. They delivered 100,000 cups of coffee via autonomous drone. Amazon say that they'll have, by the year 2030, 500 million deliveries per year via autonomous drone. JD.com in China, very similar. So drones, based on all those little technology developments that occurred, drones are a part of our day-to-day life. But I want to talk more about agriculture and some of the things I've seen with drones in ag lately. I was down in Wagga recently, and I went and visited Charles Sturt University to look at some of their drone technology. They're not using the technology, they're testing technology. They had an autonomous drone with high-definition cameras and a belly of herbicide underneath it. They would send that drone out across a crop. It would identify weeds in the crop. It would go down to those weeds, spray herbicide on those weeds, and move on. Reduce the amount of herbicide you use, reduce the amount of spray drift, obviously reduce the amount of labour you need, and don't compact the ground where tractors would normally be going on there. Fantastic technology. Down in the University of New South Wales Canberra campus, they've got a student there doing some drone research on sheep, where they're fitting heart monitors to sheep's throats, and they're sending out dogs to round up the sheep, checking their heart rates, and then they're sending out drones to actually round up the sheep and seeing whether it creates less stress for the sheep in rounding up with drones. Now, they're doing experiments. They're seeing how high the drone needs to be. They're actually seeing whether the drone needs to bark like a dog to move the sheep along, and then do some testing to see what the heart rate is for those sheep. So using using drones to round up your sheep. Down in Victoria, they're using something similar, but this time they're sending out drones to inspect sheep that are in lambing, or lambing sheep, to actually look for sheep that might be in duress, might be still for too long, and then alert the farmer that they need to go and check on some of their sheep. And in Queensland, we've got the Department of Agriculture using multispectral analysis to inspect firstly sugarcane crops, to look at the condition of those sugarcane crops to see whether they need to use more fertiliser or potentially more herbicide or pesticide on some of those crops on sugarcanes. And then looking at some of the irrigated crops they might have through Queensland, looking at areas in a paddock that might need more water to be applied to some of those paddocks. Not the water's not going to be applied by the drones, but taking those photographs using that spectral photography to see the areas of that crop that might be a little bit different. So on the back of those various developments, on the back of NASA, General Electric, Sony, some of those companies I've just mentioned, we end up with drones now, the modern drone that we see, the easy to fly, easy to use, fairly cheap drone that can be used in so many parts of society, whether it be inspecting power lines, delivering coffee, or going out and attacking weeds with herbicide on your farm. There's no doubt about it that technology keeps building on previous knowledge. Just like Isaac Newton said, we keep learning, we keep accumulating, keep building on that knowledge. So I love being in the technology game because there's so many things to learn, and in addition to that, you keep seeing where things might lead. I can't tell you how we're going to be using drones in 10 years' time. I can't tell you the technology farmers will be using in 10 years' time. I know it's going to be different, I know it's going to be pretty exciting, and I know that in regional areas, farmers are the people that are going to be driving that innovation and making those huge leaps forward. So thank you for listening for a quick history about drones. Thank you for having me along here today. It's great to catch up with Glenn. Obviously, as a mayor, I deal a little bit with Glenn, but also some locals here, Richard Boodle, Jimmy McLaughlin, a few locals that I know here through Nyngan. Great to catch up, and it gives me a huge amount of pleasure to officially declare open the Neil Earth Moving Nyngan Show. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.